All right, well, we can get started then. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Norín Dollard, and I'm a senior policy analyst and Kids Count director at the Florida Policy Institute. Today, we are going to talk about our efforts in urging Florida's Department of Education to protect students and educators on the heels of an alarming federal immigration directive. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping notes. All participants will receive a link to the press conference recording this afternoon. Also, as noted in the press advisory, we will take questions after all the speakers have gone. Now, I'd like to give you a little background on today's press conference. As many of you know, on January 20th, the Trump administration rescinded earlier guidance that prohibited U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents from carrying out enforcement actions in protected areas, including schools, churches, and hospitals. Now, the Florida Policy Institute, Florida PTA, Florida Immigrant Coalition, Pastors for Florida's Children, PS 305, and dozens of other groups have signed on to a letter to Florida Education Commissioner Manny Diaz urging the state to prioritize the health and safety of all students. In total, 62 organizations have signed the letter. In it, we ask that the state education department immediately issue guidance to school districts that prevent immigration enforcement action in Florida schools. I want to emphasize Article 9 of our state constitution says that there shall be adequate provision shall be made by law for a uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and high-quality system of free public schools. I want to emphasize the words safe and secure and ask for the Florida Department of Education to issue guidance to school districts that affirms the right protected by federal law of all students to a free public education, regardless of immigrant status, that prohibits federal immigration officials from entering school grounds without review and approval of district legal counsel, ensures that parents, staff, students know their rights and that these rights are prominently displayed throughout school campuses and on websites, and prohibits the collection of student immigration status and requires all requests for information comply with federal education privacy law. Now, to tell you a little bit about my organization, the Florida Policy Institute, or FPI. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit think tank. We promote policies that improve the quality of life and economic mobility for all Floridians. The reason that FPI got involved in this effort is because Florida prospers when all of its students can enjoy a high-quality public education. And now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Dr. Renata Bozzetto, Deputy Director of the Florida Immigration Coalition.
Thank you. My name is Renata Bozzetto, and I have the honor of serving the members of the Florida Immigrant Coalition. We are a network of 85 organizations across the state, and our mission is to grow the capacity, the connection, and consciousness of communities to strengthen pro-immigrant power in Florida. And listen, we are facing a big challenge with our neighbors who are immigrants, being afraid of doing everyday tasks, such as going to school or taking their children to school. Can you imagine what a parent feels when their American children are asking if they should carry a passport to school so they can show to their bullies that they have the right to be here? That is incredibly harmful to our children. I am also very troubled by the reckless directives of the Trump administration when they rescinded the sensitive locations memo. But what really baffles us is the absence of a centralized guidance in the state of Florida, affirming the right that kids have to public education, a right that is protected by prior veto. The absence of a guidance protecting students' right to privacy, which is protected by the Family and Education Rights and Privacy Act. I am baffled by the absence of guidance protecting awareness and education in regards to our constitutional rights. So schools are becoming a very unsafe place because if districts are tasked with drafting memos that are incoherent with our most fundamental values, the right to public education, to safe and nourishing educational space, this becomes, it impacts us all, impacts children, impacts educators, and impacts us as a society in which we do know that we thrive when we have the opportunity to educate our children. The Florida Immigrant Coalition is, because of that, joining teachers, parents, students, and our schools administrators and staff to demand that Immigration and Custom Enforcement, ICE, stay away from our schools. We do have the right to not be searched without a probable cause, and we have an obligation to reserve that right, particularly for minors. No school personnel should be compelled to present a kid to law enforcement in an absence of a judicial warrant. That is incredibly wrong. No kid should ever be interrogated by law enforcement without adequate legal counsel, without the support of their parents. What we are doing to our Constitution and our laws, if we lose the basic moral compass that keeps us away from the barbaric acts of putting kids into self-incriminating position. So the Florida Immigrant Coalition is steadfast in educating the community, and we are counting on everyone to reinforce know your rights education and to help us bring this message all the way to every leadership in the state of Florida that ICE should stay away from our schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Renata. My name is Latha Krishnaiyer, and I represent Florida PTA. We are a statewide, nonprofit, 501c3 organization, association that has been in place for 100 years. Our national PTA has been in place for 128 years, and we were founded to protect and promote the welfare of all children. We believed this 128 years ago, and we believe it today. We are committed to ensuring that every child has access to a safe, supportive, and equitable learning environment. We support policies that create a safe and supportive school environment for all families and students, including students in immigrant and mixed status families. Public schools are institutions of learning, not immigration enforcement agencies, and should not be placed in a position of determining the legal status of immigrant children or nor be required to enforce immigration laws. Protected areas should be designated in law and policy as places where federal, state, and local authorities carrying out immigration enforcement refrain from immigration enforcement actions. Designation of these protected areas contributes to a safe and supportive school environment, as well as physical and mental health and well-being of all students, not just students of an immigrant background, but every student in the schools. We believe that all schools should be defined in statute as sensitive locations, and immigration and ICE officers and agents are to refrain from enforcement actions against students in schools, including preschools, primary schools, secondary schools, colleges and universities, and other institutions of learning, or places where children are likely to be. School districts must strictly enforce, as you have heard from both our previous speakers, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, ensuring that immigration enforcement agencies cannot access student records without proper legal authorization. PTA supports the confidentiality of all school records, including records that pertain to the immigration status of children. Unrestrained access to school records to determine such status can pose a threat of unintended consequences due to any materials in a student's file that may be inaccurate. Also, as stated below, we do not believe children should be put in a position of self-incrimination. They should not be interviewed. No child, above all, no child should be approached by law enforcement without parental notification and the presence of parents and other family members. Parents should not be afraid. We are putting parents in a position that they are afraid to send their children to school. That should not be the case. Parents should be able to send their children to school, to a safe environment that's free from law enforcement actions against immigrant status. Thank you.
Thank you, Latha. I just wanted to give an update from the press advisory. Valentina Pilionetta, who is a school teacher in Santa Rosa, while not on this press call, has provided a statement. The statement will be read by Yareliz Mendez-Zamora.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Yareliz, and I'm currently serving as the policy coordinator for American Friends Service Committee, AFSC, a Quaker faith-based organization that has strived to create a more just world for over 100 years. I'm going to read Valentina's statement. She's a teacher in Florida. She's dedicated to the well-being of her students, and she would be here with us today, but she's currently in a classroom making sure that her students are educated, safe, and that they know that they are welcomed. The first few days of the Trump administration, I spoke with a few families that were afraid to send their children to school, fearing there would be an ICE presence. I spoke to the vice principal of our schools and asked what we could say to these families to put them at ease. Upon deliberation, school administrators told us to convey the message that they would not allow anyone who is not on emergency cards to remove a child from school, and that the best parents could do was send their children to school to avoid truancy problems. No one should be scared to come to school. My students are not scared at school in my classroom, but they are scared everywhere else. They feel like they're being persecuted. A student recently said, "I don't understand why they treat us worse than dogs." The psychological effect of this collective fear is detrimental to our students. How can they be expected to perform academically when they're scared to go to the grocery store? How can they come to school at peace knowing that stepping on the street, they are exposing themselves to be picked up by immigration? Needless to say, these are dark times, and every day I fear for my students and their families. I'm currently helping two of my students navigate their mother's potential deportation. One mother has been detained for driving over the speed limit and now faces the possibility of being sent back and separated from her three kids. The desperation and fear is hard to put into words. There have also been other cases of other parents getting pulled over and giving court dates. It's important that people know what's going on. Monday morning, one of my students' mothers reported to court for a traffic violation. She was picked up by ICE, and my student is left here by herself. She is scared and helpless. My call to my fellow teachers and school administrators is remember that these are children. It is our responsibility as teachers to protect them and as humans to have sympathy. I ask that you give them happiness every day and that you remind them that they are loved and welcomed, even when this country has turned their back on them.
Thank you, Yareliz. Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Mina Hosseini, and I'm here on behalf of PS 305 in Miami-Dade County. We believe that no child should have to walk into school with fear in their heart. No parent should have to wonder if today is the day that their family is torn apart. And no teacher should have to watch their students, our students, carry the weight of immigration policies designed to instill fear rather than foster learning. But as you've heard, that is exactly what is happening. The decision to strip schools of their status as safe spaces isn't just a systematic and coordinated attack against immigrant families. It's an attack on our entire public education system. Organizations like PS 305 and so many other advocates who fight for strong, well-resourced public schools are now forced to divert our focus to addressing policies that have no place in our classrooms. Instead of pushing for better funding, stronger teacher pipelines, and high-quality education for our students, we're battling fear and uncertainty deliberately imposed by this administration. This is a manufactured crisis, pulling time, energy, and resources away from the real work of improving education. And let's be clear, our classrooms should never be turned into the sites of immigration enforcement. These policies don't just disrupt learning, they've created a climate of fear that extends beyond the school walls and into every aspect of our children's lives. This is not just a policy debate, it is a moral crisis, and we call on Commissioner Diaz and the Florida Department of Education to take immediate action. School districts across the state should and must have the support to put protections in place. No immigration enforcement on school grounds, no collection of student immigration status, no school staff acting as immigration agents. Every school must be a place where students are safe, where they're allowed to learn, to dream, and to build a future without the looming threat of separation. To our families, you are not alone. There are organizations, legal advocates, and educators standing with you. To our teachers and our school staff, your role is to educate, not to police, and we see you, we support you, and we will fight to ensure that you are never forced to betray the trust of your students. And to our leaders, if you won't protect our children, we will. We will not stand by while fear is weaponized against our most vulnerable students. We will not let our classrooms become battlegrounds for politics. Hope is stronger than fear, and our communities are stronger than these threats, because our schools belong to our students, not to immigration agents, and we will do everything in our power to keep them safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mina. Good morning. I am Reverend Rachel Gunter Shapard. I am co-founder of Pastors for Florida Children and vice president of Together for Hope Rural Development Coalition in the Black Belt. I'm an ordained minister of the gospel, and I work alongside some of the most under-resourced individuals in our state and in the U.S. For many in the Sunshine State, our Holy Scriptures serve as the source of inspiration for how we live our lives. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, we see a consistent reminder to welcome the stranger, the foreigner, the refugee among us. The ancient Israelites had once been foreigners themselves, and the Scriptures consistently bring about reminders that they should never forget that. For those like myself who are members of the Christian faith, Jesus serves as our example for how we carry ourselves in the world. Throughout the Gospels, we hear the same call that we heard from the Hebrew Scriptures. For I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Jesus reminds us that our character, our freedom, our own liberation from the things that bind us is wrapped up in how we treat the most vulnerable in our society. Orphans, widows, strangers, and children, Scriptures continuously state that these are the most vulnerable among us. Jesus himself brought a child into the midst of those gathered, saying, "Whoever welcomes one little child such as this welcomes me." Our public schools should be places that are welcoming to all Florida's children. They should be a safe haven where children are cared for, fed, offered learning and safety, where they are surrounded by those who seek to give them every opportunity to grow and to thrive. Yet if any of our children are subjected to fear regarding coming to school or trauma in their school environment due to anti-immigrant actions, this is a detriment to their human development, to their ability to learn, and it will impact all of our students in schools. For immigrant children in Florida schools are not simply strangers or foreigners. They are the friends our children love and play with. They are the families, their families are the parents we volunteer alongside with at school, events and fundraisers. They're our next door neighbors who make up the very fabric of our communities. Florida embraces all of its children. We must embrace all of our children in our schools. And people of faith view every child as God's creation, as a member of the human family, as one of the most vulnerable among us, deserving of our protection, our love, and our utmost care. May we treat all children as such in Florida's schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers on today's press conference. We are now going to take some questions from press. You can ask the questions using Zoom Q&A or the raise hand function. As we wait for some questions, a reminder that all of the participants on today's call will receive a recording and a copy of the press release later this afternoon. Okay, and it looks like we have a couple of questions. Jackie with Florida Phoenix, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thank you for hosting this panel. I'm wondering if there have been any training opportunities, whether it be through the Florida State PTA or any other groups with the Florida Immigrant Coalition or any other local unions, any trainings for teachers on how to approach situations regarding immigration.
I can start with that. Thank you for your question, Jackie. So we have had several memos issued by ACLU and SPLC regarding best practices. But what is really a big concern to us is putting this burden on teachers. Teachers should not be trained on what to do with ICE. ICE should not be in school in the first place. Teachers should be concerned about creating a nourishing environment in which kids can learn. Teachers should be concerned about their students feeling welcome and empowered in the classroom. The fact that we are even considering what we need to do so our teachers take the burden of creating this sanctity of learning because of a lack of appropriate guidance from the state and a reckless rescission from the federal government, that is part of the problem. So what we are really advocating for is a clear guidance from the state that ICE should not enter the sanctity of our learning facilities, should not enter schools, and schools should be protected from that type of enforcement. It is traumatizing for students and it's traumatizing for school personnel alike. Nobody should take this burden.
Great. Thank you so much, Renata. We have our next question from Stephanie. I'm going to allow you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
All right. This is not Stephanie. This is probably Stephanie, my a colleague at the assignment desk at NBC 6 Telemundo, probably signed up for it. This is Hatso. I cover politics and immigration now with all this onslaught that we're seeing from the federal government. You know, one thing, this is kind of half a statement, but also a question. You know, you mentioned several stories that to us seem amazing in the sense that for example, if these parents are being stopped and then being detained for immigration stuff, these are the stories that we should be telling. I totally understand the fear involved, but as media outlets, we are willing to hide identities and faces because I think we're not telling enough of them and people are not realizing that this is happening in our own community. So I wanted to, that said, with that statement said, I wanted to get insight from you as to how we could better tell stories that people can relate to make sure that people know that this is happening, because this is happening in our own communities and many of us don't know it's happening.
I can go ahead and take a stab at it. So speaking as Yareliz from AFSC, we're seeing such an increased level of fear, especially day after day with new executive orders. People are absolutely terrified, and they think that if they speak out, or even if they're hiding their faces or they're distorting their voices, that they're going to get found out. There is this massive, I want to say, fear, and just like the idea of, if I speak out, I'm going to get caught and I'm going to get separated from my kids. Right now, we ourselves are trying to figure out what is the best way to be able to interact with communities and to uplift these stories. And sometimes the best way to do it is through somebody else being able to speak and share. And it's what we're finding thus far that works. I mean, I can tell you that we have tried so hard to get people to tell their stories, and they tell us, can you do it? Can you go ahead and maybe just, I'll stand next to you and then you share it. We're also trying to find workarounds.
I appreciate that, just because we need to figure out ways to do this. Otherwise, those stories go, um, don't go anywhere, and we need to be telling them.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is a two-part question. What are conditions like in schools in Tampa for immigrant students, and has ICE been present in Tampa schools? I'm not sure if we can speak to the specific region on this call, but if anyone can answer broadly what they're hearing.
I can take a first pass at that one, and probably maybe Latha has more to add to it, but I have not heard of any incidents in the Hillsborough schools. I would probably follow up with Rob Crete at the Hillsborough Classroom Teachers Association to get more information on school climate, but I'm not aware of anything.
Yeah, to follow up, we haven't heard of anything in our schools, other locations maybe, but not in our schools regarding children. So that is, I can't speak for Tampa, but in Broward County, we haven't had any incidents so far.
Great, thank you. Next question, have we seen a drop in attendance across schools since the new federal directive?
I think that varies. I don't think there is a big drop in attendance, but we are hearing, these are anecdotal stories from our parents in other in schools across, the state, that parents are afraid to send their children to school, and some may be holding them back, but we haven't had any data so far showing that there is a big drop in attendance, but we are hearing a lot of anecdotal stories that parents are afraid and keeping their children at home rather than sending them to school.
I would say the same. I'm in Duval County. My children are in public schools in Duval, and although I have not heard any data, we continue to hear from parents, from faith communities, that they are trying to be the go-between to those who are too terrified to come to school, to share assignments, to make sure they have food. So we continue to see parents, faith communities, that are friends and neighbors reaching out to those that are too terrified to come, but no data as of yet that I've heard.
I may also share, I am in Palm Beach County. I am also a mother. And so that for me is personal, and also not only because I hear from my children, but also my neighbors and their children. So I want to reinforce here that we have two problems. One is the concern of kids not going to school, physically not going to school. And that is something that we want to combat, right? We know that each day that a kid misses from school, it's a valuable learning opportunity that they miss. But the other thing, which my colleagues are eloquently exposed, is the fear and the emotional distress in which kids and educators are forced to enter an environment physically, but have their minds placed on the question whether or not I'm going to come back home and my parents will be there. Whether or not I'll be safe when I am riding the school bus with a driver that can be arrested because their temporary protected status will be invalidated very shortly. That is a context that creates a lot of distress for kids. So we have really two concerns. One is that they are physically present, and the other is that they are in the necessary mindset. So they are there learning, and they are having a nourishing experience, which we know it's explicitly hindered by practices like this.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sonia, if I may, with respect to Miami-Dade, we also, it's unclear if there's been a drop in attendance as a result. But I just want to add that now that our sheriffs are deputized to act as ICE agents, these unfolding day-to-day responses to what, again, we think of as a systematic and coordinated effort to undermine the well-being as Dr. Renata has so eloquently shared, is that there is an emotional impact that hinders students' abilities to engage in learning in these environments. And so I think there are more questions than answers at this stage. And that's something that we have to grapple with. But we appreciate, and I'll speak for myself, appreciate that while we may not be able to cover the stories of families, I think there are mechanisms by which we can put pressure on institutions who should have these answers. And that is why we are convening today, because we have state leaders who can provide supports, who can provide some level of guidance. Our local leadership at Miami-Dade has done what they can in a very contentious and highly polarized political environment to remind parents that schools are, that they will act in a way where schools are safe spaces regardless of these federal mandates, but to continue pressing on and appreciate all of my colleagues on this call, because this is just the beginning of what we will see as an onslaught directed towards our children and families.
Great. Thank you, Mina. I don't believe we have any more questions. So we're going to wrap things up. I'd like to give all the speakers a chance if they would like to add any closing remarks.
I too would like to just thank all my colleagues here this morning and really in imploring the Florida Department of Education to ensure that all of our kids are safe and secure and supported in schools. And so thank you all, and thanks to all the members of the press for coming as well.
Great, thank you so much. And as a reminder, we will be sending a follow-up email this afternoon with a link to the recording and a copy of the press release. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.